How's it going, everybody? This is Beat the Bush. Today I'm going to review these meat slicers from Vevor and Beswood. Both of them are 240 watt 10-inch chromium plated blades. Vevor is actually around $100 less than this Beswood one. Long story short, in terms of cutting performance, I was able to do the same thing on either machine. The difference is in the build quality. You basically get what you pay for. If you're on a budget and you cannot spend more than $250 on a meat slicer and you want a commercial style one, get the Vevor. However, if you have the money, I would go with the Beswood. So let me show you some tips and tricks that I learned only after using this type of machines for several months. On the Vevor, when you have a piece of meat, you want to squish this down towards a blade and you move it back and forth to slice the meat. Let me set it on what I normally use it at, around position 1 or so. And if you're trying to slice everything that you have, this gap will represent some amount that's left over. So you can loosen this knob slightly. Of course, after you do that, it's gonna have a little bit of play, but if you loosen it, it kind of gets closer towards the blade. You don't want to get so close that the blade cuts into this metal spikes here. Let's try cutting some meat with this first. Here I have some lamb meat, and this is just right out of the freezer. Never grab it towards the right side. The rails over here are lubricated with grease, so you don't want to touch that and get your hands dirty. So if you're ever going to transport this from one table to another, grab towards the left side on both sides over here. If you want to store the cable, I wrap the cable all the way around the machine underneath this hole here, and the cable is stowed away nicely like this, and then we can carry it around. Turn it on. It's using 138 watts to spin the motor. I'm going to adjust it to level 1. We put the meat in. It certainly feels very similar to the Beswood, and it appears to be able to cut through frozen meat just fine. If it's a little bit thick, we can adjust it. There's a little bit thinner there. Let's go really thin, but this is not what I would want to do for hot pot. See? It's kind of like shaving. Watch the energy consumption as I'm slicing it. 174 watts. So it uses a little bit more when it's being restricted. When the Beswood is on and not cutting anything, it's consuming 92 watts. Notice the on-off button is kind of flipped over. Let me start cutting. Seems like it's peaking at 100 watts. It appears to use a little bit less energy, and I have a little bit of leftover here. That's really hard to put through this machine. And on the Beswood, it only has 7 spikes here to hold the meat. It's a bit sparse, but it's a bit easier to clean because you can get around these spikes a little bit easier. On the Vevor, the spikes are a lot more dense. If you have smaller pieces of meat, it will still latch onto them just fine. Although I do like the pins being closely spaced, it's a bit harder to clean, especially when you're trying to do it fast. Let's see if I can cut this leftover from the Beswood. Loosen this knob down here a little bit. You can only get like 1 or 2 slices more out of it. If being vertical is 0 degrees, then the Vevor is about 35 degrees tilted. On the Beswood is about 20 degrees. The tilting of the panel is really up to your own preferences. On the Vevor, each of the buttons are shielded, but not the entire housing. On the Beswood, there's a silicone cover that you can remove to clean. In my experience, this is pretty rare to get dirty. All the business is like over here and over here in this area. The Vevor knob is a bit bigger, and all of the numbers are scribed into the metal. On the Beswood is a plastic knob with printed on numbers. On the Vevor, there's this curious knob thing. You can loosen it and turn it so that it will give support to this little metal piece. There's a little bit of play in it, so if you close this in, gently touch the back of this panel, it'll give it some additional support. This will give you a little bit more accuracy in slicing thickness. On the Beswood, there's no such mechanism, so if I push on this, it moves a little bit. However, as long as you don't push your meat very hard against this panel, I found that it doesn't move too much. Notice on the Vevor, on the leading edge right before the blade, this panel has little divots in it all throughout to reduce friction. And these divots lead all the way to the blade. So my initial concern is if you have non-frozen meat, you can kind of push the meat into here, and when you cut it, it may cause your meat to be slightly thicker. On the Beswood, there are similar but smaller divots, but when you get up to the blade, it's completely flat over here, so slightly different configuration. Both of these are chromium plated blades. That just means it's chrome. It's a little bit slipperier than typical carbon steel. However, a chrome could get damaged if you use very harsh cleaning detergents. So when cleaning the chromium blades, just use mild soap. Also notice that on the Vevor, there's a little handle here. On the Beswood, there's no such thing. I just use this handle over here to slice meats. The Vevor has a redundant handle here and here. Both of them has the blade grinder, and both of them can be either in the grinding position or the normal usage position. Cleanup takes a little bit of effort. Just a dime-sized amount of soap. Make sure to retract the blade all the way to nothing so that when you wipe it this way, you won't cut yourself or the sponge. Be sure to wipe behind the blade too and rotate it around. Once in a while, you want to disassemble it too. Clean the inside in case anything gets stuck. I would try to wipe it this way rather than this way because it'll cut your sponge. Then I use a clean sponge, wipe it 2 or 3 times. Then I just wipe everything dry, and now we can store it. On the Vevor, the back of the blade is a brushed metal, not chrome, and this little metal piece blocks meat from going inside. Clearance over here, it's about 3 or 4 millimeters thick. On the Beswood, the back of the blade is completely chrome. You can see the mirror finish over here, and the debris blocking piece is made out of plastic. Clearance over here is about 1.5 millimeters thick. I've removed the cover plate on the Vevor. It is somewhat reflective. This is more like a brushed metal. On the Beswood, this blade says it's made in Italy, RASP brand, and the finish is more mirror-like. The sliding rail is quite thick on the Vevor. There's a spring in the front and also in the back to help absorb any kind of shock. On the Beswood, there's only one spring towards the user. On the other side, there's just a little grommet to stop it from clacking. On the Vevor, this is the thickness adjustment mechanism. It moves the blade in and out. Notice this piece is a fiber plastic type, and there's some grease in there. There's one guide rail and a metal beam over here that just kind of guides it. On the Beswood, the knob is a bit smaller. This is made out of plastic, and there's also a pin that goes along those rails to make it go in and out. Notice the rails uses 2 steel rods rather than the Vevor, which uses 1 and a guide rail. The Vevor uses this more pliable rubber foot. The Beswood, it uses this harder rubber. On the Vevor machine, here it says 150 watt, 2.4 amps. 150 must be the nominal wattage because 2.4 times 110 is 240 watts. That would be what it indicates on the outside. Notice on either side of this rod, it's held down by some clamps. The motor has a little fan here for cooling. And from the energy we saw earlier, it seems like on idle, the Vevor machine uses slightly more power. Here's a look at the Beswood machine. The rod is a little bit thinner. On each side is held down by machine screws. I think either method is fine. The motor is a little bit different. There's no fan on the outside, but when I turn this, it seems like it does not turn the internal winding. And then you have the electronics over here. Both slicers are belt driven. You can see it in there. Here's the belt on the Beswood. On the Vevor, there's an additional piece of metal that holds this panel on. This little grommet thing has a slight play to it. Might cause for some food particles to get stuck here. The Beswood have a bit tighter tolerance. I can't easily lift this little grommet off, and it's pretty much just stuck in there. If you guys are interested in either of these machines, check out my affiliate link down in the video description below. Thanks for watching this video. Until next time.